Good evening and welcome. Whether you're settling down in Lagos or wherever you find yourself tonight, thank you for being here. Before we begin, if you appreciate these carefully researched stories told in a way that honors both the mystery and your need for rest, please consider subscribing for more thoughtful true crime content. Tonight, we travel to Oslo, Norway, in the spring of 1995, to a luxury hotel room on the 28th floor, where a woman checked in under a name that wasn't hers, carrying belongings with every identifying label removed, and speaking languages that gave no clue to where she truly came from. 3 days later, she would be found dead in that room, a gun in her hand, and not a single person in the world able to say who she really was. This is the story of the woman the world knows as Jennifer Fairgate, though that name, like everything else about her, was a carefully constructed fiction. Nearly 30 years after her death, despite DNA analysis, isotope testing, international police cooperation, and thousands of hours of investigation, no one knows her real name. No one knows where she came from. No one knows why she came to Oslo. She remains one of the most mysterious, unidentified persons in modern European history. A woman who erased herself so thoroughly from the world that even death couldn't reveal who she'd been. So settle into your pillows, take a slow, deep breath, and join me as we explore one of the most haunting locked-room mysteries of our time. A case where every answer leads only to more questions, and where the truth remains hidden behind a door that may never fully open. On the evening of May 31st, 1995, at approximately 10:44 p.m., a woman walked into the lobby of the Oslo Plaza Hotel. At the time, it was the top luxury hotel in Norway's capital city, a gleaming tower of glass and steel rising above downtown Oslo, catering to diplomats, business executives, and wealthy travelers from around the world. The reception area was busy that evening, full of newly arrived guests checking in, bellhops moving luggage, the controlled chaos of a high-end hotel at the peak of tourist season. The woman was stylishly dressed entirely in black. A long blouse, elegant in its simplicity, the kind of outfit that would look at home in any upscale establishment in any European capital. She approached the front desk and requested a room. She booked room 2805 on the 28th floor for 3 nights, at a cost of 1,845 kroner per night, a significant sum in 1995, roughly equivalent to several $100s per night in today's currency. It was an expensive room with a beautiful view of the city. When asked to fill out the registration forms, the woman provided the name Jennifer Fairgate, though she twice misspelled it as Fergit on the hotel forms. This detail would later seem significant. Had she forgotten her own alias in the moment? Or was there another explanation? She claimed to be 21 years old and provided an address in Verlaine, Belgium, Rue de la Station. She wrote that a man named Lois Fairgate would be accompanying her, though the receptionist didn't see anyone with her at the time of check-in. And then came the most unusual part of her arrival. Despite the hotel's standard procedures for such an upscale establishment, Jennifer was not asked for identification. She was not asked to provide a credit card during registration. Somehow, inexplicably, she was simply given the key to room 2805 and allowed to proceed upstairs. How this happened remains one of the small mysteries within the larger mystery. Hotel staff later couldn't fully explain the oversight. Perhaps the busy evening, the crowded lobby, the woman's confident demeanor, all combined to create a moment where normal procedures weren't followed. Or perhaps there was another reason entirely. One hotel employee would later report seeing Jennifer with a man, described as being between 25 and 40 years old, going into the room with her. But this sighting was never conclusively verified, and the man, if he existed, was never identified. Jennifer took the elevator up to the 28th floor, walked down the carpeted hallway, and unlocked the door to room 2805, the room that would become her tomb, though neither she nor anyone else knew it yet. The door closed behind her, and Jennifer Fairgate, whoever she really was, settled in for what should have been an ordinary stay at a luxury hotel. But nothing about this stay would prove to be ordinary. For the next 3 days, Jennifer Fairgate existed in a kind of liminal space, present but not present, there but not quite there. Hotel records and key card logs would later paint a picture of a guest who seemed almost ghost-like in her movements. On Friday morning, June 2nd, she appeared at the front desk and extended her stay until Sunday. She was given 2 new key cards. Still, no credit card was requested, no form of payment collected. The oversight continued, compounding with each passing day. Key card records showed that someone entered room 2805 at 8:50 a.m. on June 2nd, and again at 11:03 a.m. that same day. This suggested Jennifer had been absent from the room for 20 to 24 hours since Thursday morning, a long absence for a hotel guest, especially one with no apparent business in Oslo and no known connections to the city. Where had she been during those hours? The hotel had no record of her leaving through the main lobby, but there were multiple exits. She could have come and gone without being noticed. Oslo in early June would have been experiencing its brief, beautiful Nordic summer. Long days of sunlight, mild temperatures, the city alive with activity. Had Jennifer walked the streets, met with someone, conducted some kind of business? On the evening of June 2nd, Jennifer attempted 2 international telephone calls from her room to Belgium. The numbers differed by only 1 digit and were directed to the Sering and Gracehallen areas, consistent with the location she'd given when checking in. But the calls didn't connect, and no recipient was ever identified. Were these attempts to reach someone specific? Were the wrong numbers intentional or accidental? Did someone refuse to answer, recognizing the caller ID? Or were the numbers simply disconnected, relics of an identity that didn't truly exist? These questions have no answers. Jennifer's last confirmed sighting by hotel staff occurred on the evening of June 2nd, when a worker named Kristen Anderson brought her room service. Kristen would remember this delivery specifically because Jennifer gave her a large tip of 50 kroner, approximately $8 in $1995, a generous amount that stood out. The food that was delivered remained partially uneaten in the room, later photographed by police. A meal interrupted, or simply a meal ordered out of necessity rather than appetite? We'll never know. After this sighting, the Do Not Disturb sign was hung on the door of room 2805. From that moment on, no hotel staff entered the room. No housekeeping, no fresh towels or clean sheets. For the next day, whoever was inside that room wanted to be left completely alone. Meanwhile, downstairs, the hotel's accounting department was growing concerned. Jennifer Fairgate still hadn't provided any payment information. Several automated notices appeared on the TV screen in room 2805, asking for payment. Someone in the room responded okay to each request, but no one came to the front desk to actually pay. By Saturday, June 3rd, the situation had reached a point where action needed to be taken. One of the hotel's receptionists, Evie Tudum-Jertsen, realized that the woman in room 2805 had exceeded her credit limit and still hadn't provided payment information. It was time to send someone up to collect payment, or ask the guest to leave. At approximately 7:50 p.m. on Saturday, June 3rd, 1995, Espen Naz, a 25-year-old security guard, was asked to check on the guest in room 2805 because of the lack of payment card being registered to the room. Espen took the elevator up to the 28th floor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, the sounds of the city far below muffled by thick windows and solid walls. He walked down the corridor until he reached room 2805. He knocked on the door. A sudden gunshot resonated from within. The muffled sound, though somewhat dampened by the room's heavy door and concrete walls, was unmistakable. Espen instinctively retreated, waiting momentarily in the corridor, grappling with the gravity of what the sound likely indicated. A gunshot within a locked room. The implications were immediately dire. Espen didn't have a two-way radio. He couldn't call for immediate backup or alert police from where he stood. Instead, he left to inform the head of security, rather than using a radio to broadcast his suspicions. This decision, to leave the hallway rather than remain at the scene, would later become one of the most scrutinized aspects of the entire case. The room remained unsupervised for 15 minutes after the gunshot was heard. 15 minutes during which, theoretically, someone could have exited the room, fled down a stairwell or service elevator, and left the hotel entirely. 15 minutes that would create doubt about everything that followed. When security and then police finally entered room 2805, approximately 50 minutes after the gunshot, they found a scene that appeared, at first glance, straightforward. The door had been double-locked from the inside. A young woman lay on the bed, covered in blood, dead from a gunshot wound to her head. She was holding a Browning 9mm pistol in her right hand, the gun still gripped in what appeared to be the position of someone who had just fired it. The scene suggested suicide. A person alone in a locked room, a self-inflicted gunshot wound, no signs of forced entry or struggle. Norwegian police, seeing what appeared before them, began processing the scene as a suicide. But almost immediately, investigators began noticing things that didn't fit the narrative. The gun was held upside down in her hand, an awkward and unusual position for a self-inflicted wound. There was no blood or gunshot residue on her hand, something that should be present after firing a gun at close range. Chief pathologist Dr. Torlev Ole Rognum would later note, "I don't think I've ever seen a case without any blood spots on the hand in a gunshot suicide." A test shot was discovered. A bullet had been fired into a pillow near the body, suggesting someone had tested the weapon before the fatal shot. This was inconsistent with impulsive suicide. Another key card to the room was found, presumably the one that had been issued to Lois Fairgate, the man who was supposed to be staying with Jennifer but who had never been seen by most staff and whose whereabouts were completely unknown. The room itself was strange. There were no toiletries in the bathroom. No toothbrush, no hairbrush, nothing that would provide DNA evidence. All identification information, every label, every tag, had been removed from the woman's clothing. She appeared to have only packed clothing for her upper body. Blouses, bras, a blazer. No trousers, no skirts, no dresses. Why would someone pack so selectively? The Browning pistol's serial number had been partially removed, scraped away with acid to deny traceability. In the room was a black Braun Buffel attaché case containing 25 rounds of 9mm ammunition, with another 7 rounds in the pistol's magazine, 34 bullets total, far more than anyone would need for a simple suicide. Police quickly realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a straightforward suicide. The question was, what exactly had happened in room 2805? The first priority for investigators was identification. Who was this woman? Once they knew her identity, they could contact family, understand her circumstances, perhaps begin to make sense of why she'd ended up dead in a hotel room. But identifying Jennifer Fairgate would prove impossible. Her fingerprints were taken and run through Interpol's database. No matches were found. She wasn't in any criminal database, wasn't in any missing persons reports that matched her description, wasn't in any system anywhere. The address she'd given in Verlaine, Belgium, Rue de la Station, was checked. It didn't exist. None of the information she'd provided on the hotel registration forms ever existed. Every piece of personal data was false. The autopsy revealed some basic facts. The woman was approximately 159 centimeters tall, about 5 feet 2 inches or 5 feet 3 inches, weighed 67 kilograms, about 147 pounds, and had short dark hair that had been dyed and blue eyes. Although she'd claimed to be 21 years old, pathologists estimated her actual age to be around 30, give or take 5 years. Her dental work was notably sophisticated, featuring gold and porcelain fillings commonly used in the US and some European countries, such as the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. She had 14 fillings and several gold crowns, unusual for someone her age and atypical for Norway. This suggested she'd had access to expensive dental care, probably outside of Scandinavia. She spoke fluent German and English, though her English was described as poor by some witnesses. Several people noted she also spoke Flemish, the Dutch dialect spoken in parts of Belgium. Her clothing provided few clues. She had been dressed entirely in black. A long blouse, bra, silk tap pants, stockings, and Italian-made heeled shoes. She wore a gold ring on her right middle finger. On her left wrist was a Citizen Aquilin diving watch, model CQ 1021-50, which had its batteries replaced in March 1995, just 2 months before her death. In the room, police found a nearly empty bottle of men's Ungaro Pour Home cologne and a turquoise-green travel bag from the German manufacturer Travelight, containing 3 bras, tights, and a top. A sleeveless blouse, gray coat, and women's blazer from the German manufacturer René Lezard were hung in the wardrobe, with a cotton jumper and a long black leather jacket placed on the luggage shelf. The German connection appeared repeatedly: the Travelight bag, the René Lezard blazer, her fluent German, the dental work consistent with Germany or Switzerland. But was she German? Or was this another misdirection, another layer of the persona she'd constructed? Investigators tried to trace the gun. It was a Browning 9mm pistol, commonly used by criminals and the Norwegian army. But with the serial number removed, tracing its origin was impossible. Had it come from the black market? From a military source? From an intelligence service? There was no way to know. Police also found a shopping bag in the room with the number 2816 marked on it, and an unidentified fingerprint. Room 2816 was on the same floor, just down the hall from Jennifer's room. But at the time, no one thought to check who was staying in room 2816. By the time journalist Lars Christian Wegner investigated the case years later, the hotel no longer had its registration records from 1995, so no one knows who was in that room. However, a woman staying in room 2818, Borghildstrandines, called Oslo police 6 days after Jennifer's death to report a suspicious couple she'd seen on the floor, and a Belgian man, identified only as Mr. X, had stayed in the room across from Jennifer shortly before her death. When tracked down and questioned, Mr. X claimed he was informed about the death on the 28th floor when he checked out on the morning of Saturday, June 3rd. But Jennifer died on the evening of June 3rd. How could he have known about a death that hadn't happened yet? Was he mistaken about the date? Or did Jennifer actually die earlier than officials determined? Every lead raised new questions. Every answer revealed only more mysteries. After a year of investigation, having exhausted all available leads and unable to identify the woman, Norwegian police made the difficult decision to close the case. On June 26, 1996, she was buried in an unmarked grave at Vestergravland Cemetery in Oslo, without funeral rites, without a headstone, without any mourners. The woman who'd called herself Jennifer Fairgate was laid to rest, her real name still unknown, her true story still untold. In the decades since Jennifer Fairgate's death, her case has inspired countless theories, each attempting to explain the inexplicable. Let's explore the main possibilities, understanding that each has compelling evidence and significant problems. This was the official conclusion of Norwegian police. Oslo police documents stated a 99.9% certainty that the death was a suicide. The room was locked from the inside. The woman was holding the gun. She'd been under financial pressure at the hotel. She'd made no attempt to get help. But the problems with this theory are substantial. The position of the gun, the lack of blood spatter and gunshot residue, the test shot into the pillow, the massive amount of ammunition, none of this fits typical suicide patterns. Dr. Rognum noted that investigators checked for alcohol but not drugs in her system. Her apparent lack of struggle may suggest she was unconscious if the death was in fact homicide. And perhaps most compellingly, why would someone planning suicide go to such elaborate lengths to conceal their identity? Most people who take their own lives want to be identified, want their loved ones to know what happened. Jennifer did the opposite. She constructed multiple layers of false identity specifically to prevent anyone from ever knowing who she was. Some experts have noted that someone could have knelt over her while she was unconscious and fired the gun at point-blank range, staging the scene to look like suicide. The 15-minute gap when the room was unobserved after the gunshot would have given a killer time to escape. The door being double-locked from the inside is a problem for this theory, but not insurmountable. The door appeared to have been locked after someone exited the room. Some locks can be manipulated from outside with the right tools or techniques, especially by someone with training. But if it was murder, who was the killer? Lois Fairgate, the mysterious man who was registered to the room but never clearly seen? Mr. X, the Belgian who somehow knew about the death before it happened? Someone else entirely? And what was the motive? Was Jennifer involved in something dangerous, espionage, organized crime, witness protection gone wrong? Or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? This is perhaps the most dramatic, but also one of the most discussed theories. Norwegian intelligence officer Ola Kaldager told the Netflix series Unsolved Mysteries that the removal of clothing tags and her language fluency were consistent with intelligence tradecraft. Others have noted her check-in without ID, a guard leaving after hearing a gunshot, and the swift suicide ruling as potentially suspicious. The use of hotels for operational purposes is as old as espionage itself and is still common practice. Based on key card logs, Jennifer was absent from the room for extended periods, at one point for approximately 20 hours, which could indicate operational activity. The Oslo Plaza Hotel in 1995 was hosting important diplomatic meetings and peacekeeping negotiations. It wasn't uncommon for powerful people to stay there. Could Jennifer have been an intelligence operative, either gathering information or serving as a courier? Former CIA officer John Sipper suggested it's possible she was a Russian intelligence officer or asset, noting that in the 1990s, after the Soviet collapse, many former KGB officers went into organized crime, and there was much more overlap of Russian organized crime and intelligence, and the two were often synonymous. The Citizen Aquiland watch on her wrist adds an intriguing element to this theory. Watches of Espionage, a specialized research group, noted that her watch is potentially a clue to solving the puzzle. The Citizen Aquiland was a sophisticated diving watch produced in January 1992, with batteries replaced just before her trip, the kind of reliable, multifunctional timepiece an operative might carry. However, the intelligence theory has strong counterarguments. There's a plausible scenario that the mutilated serial number on the gun simply indicates it was acquired through the black market rather than being a spy ghost gun. And language fluency is common in Europe, especially for someone educated in border regions. Most critically, without concrete evidence of espionage, without documents, without leaks, the spy theory remains speculation. The connection to other cases. Jennifer's case is eerily similar to two other cases in Norway. In 1987, the Cambo man was found dead near train tracks in South Norway without identification and with tags cut from his clothing. DNA testing revealed a connection to Belgium. Even more striking, about 2 decades before Jennifer, a woman referred to as the Istel woman was found partially burned with poison in her stomach in a remote part of Norway called Ice Valley. She too came from or around Belgium. Disguises and encrypted messages were found among her belongings. The tags were cut from her clothing. Many believe she was also a spy. 3 unidentified bodies in Norway over 3 decades, all with Belgian connections, all with removed identification tags, all with mysterious circumstances. Coincidence? Or evidence of something larger? A network, perhaps, or a pattern of operations that went tragically wrong? The truth is, we don't know. And after nearly 30 years, we may never know. In 2020, Jennifer Fairgate's story gained international attention after the Netflix series Unsolved Mysteries featured her case in an episode titled Death in Oslo. The episode sparked renewed interest among amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike. Modern forensic technology has provided new tools for investigation, using carbon-14 isotope analysis, a technique developed during the Cold War when atmospheric nuclear testing saturated the atmosphere with C14 isotopes that were absorbed into human teeth. Scientists determined that Jennifer was likely born around 1971. This was more precise than the pathologist's original estimate and confirmed she was older than the 21 years she'd claimed. Journalist Lars Christian Wegner, who has been deeply involved in investigating the case, has explored the potential of genetic genealogy as a tool for identification. This method, which involves comparing DNA samples with public databases to identify relatives, has solved other cold cases. While it hasn't yet been implemented in Norway for criminal investigations, it holds promise for potentially uncovering Jennifer's identity. A DNA profile has been created from Jennifer's remains and shared through Interpol with police forces across Europe. Every day, there's a possibility that somewhere, in some database, a match might appear. A relative submitting DNA for genealogical research. A cold case being reopened in another country. Some piece of information that finally connects Jennifer Fairgate to her real identity. Wegner has also investigated potential connections to other events in Europe during that period. On June 24, 1995, just 3 weeks after Jennifer died, the first disappearance attributed to serial killer Marc Dutroux took place in Belgium. Dutrox's crimes would eventually change how missing persons paperwork was handled throughout Belgium and surrounding European areas. According to Wegner, in theory, it could be that a missing persons report was stuffed into a drawer in a local police office somewhere in Europe without ever making it into the centralized registries during this chaotic period. Is it possible that Jennifer was reported missing by someone, somewhere, but the report was lost in bureaucratic confusion? The case has also inspired a dedicated online community. Forums, social media groups, amateur investigators who pore over every detail, every photograph, every piece of evidence, searching for the clue that everyone else has missed. These communities have sometimes provided valuable insights in other cold cases, and hope remains that someone, somewhere, might recognize something about Jennifer that leads to a breakthrough. Jennifer's case remains officially open with the formal verdict of suicide, but many investigators privately believe there's more to the story. The Norwegian police have kept the file active, and advances in forensic science continue to offer new possibilities for analysis. Somewhere in Europe, there might be people who knew Jennifer by her real name, a family wondering what happened to a daughter or sister who disappeared in the mid-1990s, friends who lost touch with someone and never learned why, perhaps even children who never knew what became of their mother. Or perhaps Jennifer truly was alone in the world, her elaborate identity erasure successful even in death, her secrets kept forever. And so we come to the end of Jennifer Fairgate's story, though like all unsolved mysteries, it has no real ending. Just questions that echo down through the years, and a woman whose name we'll never truly know. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll think about the nature of identity itself. How much of who we are exists in the labels we wear, the names we answer to, the documents that prove our existence. Jennifer removed all of these markers, erased every trace of her real self. And in doing so, she became eternal in her mystery, more famous in death as an unknown person than she might ever have been in life under her real name. The case reminds us that in our interconnected world, with its databases and DNA analysis and global police cooperation, it's still possible to disappear completely. It's still possible to be unknown. There are still shadows where people can hide or be hidden, even in plain sight. But it also reminds us of our fundamental need to be known, to be identified, to be remembered. Jennifer Fairgate lies in an unmarked grave, her real name unknown to the caretakers who tend the cemetery. But she's not forgotten. Thousands of people around the world know her story, wonder about her life, hope that someday, somehow, her identity will be discovered. That's perhaps the most human part of this mystery, the collective desire to give this woman back her name, to honor who she really was, to solve the puzzle not out of mere curiosity but out of a deep sense that everyone deserves to be known, to be mourned by name, to have their story told truly. Maybe tomorrow will be the day someone recognizes something in her story. Maybe a DNA match will finally appear. Maybe an old file will be discovered, or a deathbed confession made, or a connection finally drawn that reveals the truth. Or maybe Jennifer Fairgate's real name will remain forever unknown, and she'll stay as she is now, a mystery wrapped in an enigma, a woman with no past, a case with no solution, a door that will never quite open. Thank you for listening tonight. If you found this story thought-provoking, please consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime content that treats these mysteries with the depth and respect they deserve. Sleep well, rest peacefully, and remember that even in cases without answers, there is value in the asking, meaning in the wondering, and dignity in the remembering. Good night, Story 2. Good evening and welcome, whether you're settling down in Lagos or finding rest elsewhere in the world. Thank you for being here tonight. The rain you hear falling gently in the background will accompany us throughout this story, a soothing rhythm to carry you towards sleep. Before we begin, if you appreciate these thoughtfully researched stories designed for your peaceful rest, please consider subscribing. Tonight, we travel to London in August 2010, to a quiet flat in Pimlico where a brilliant mathematician lived a secret life. A man who could break codes that protected nations, who spoke Welsh as his first language and graduated university at 17, who cycled through the Welsh countryside and loved the quiet solitude of numbers and patterns. His name was Gareth Williams, and the circumstances of his death would become one of the most puzzling mysteries in modern British history. This is a story about genius and secrecy, about a life lived in shadows by necessity, and about a death that defied every attempt at simple explanation. It's a story where even now, nearly 15 years later, the truth remains elusive, hidden behind locked doors and classified files. So settle deeper into your pillows, listen to the rain, take a slow, calming breath, and let's journey together into a mystery that asks more questions than it answers. The strange case of the spy in the bag. Gareth Wyn Williams was born on September 26, 1978, in Valley, a small village on the island of Anglesey off the northwest coast of Wales. Anglesey is a place of rugged coastal beauty, where the Irish Sea meets the land in dramatic cliffs and quiet beaches, where Welsh is still spoken as a first language by many residents, where communities are close-knit and everyone knows their neighbors. Gareth grew up in the area around Holyhead, the largest town on Anglesey. His father, Ian, worked at the Wilfa nuclear power station on the island. His mother, Ellen, raised Gareth and his sister, Carrie, in a loving, stable home where education was valued and curiosity encouraged. The family attended Bethel Chapel in Holyhead, part of the tight community fabric of the island. Welsh was Gareth's first language, the language of his home and his heart. English came second. From his earliest years, it was clear that Gareth possessed an exceptional mind. He attended Ysgol Jinrad Morswyn Primary School, where his head teacher, Aylwyn Williams, quickly recognized something extraordinary in the young boy. At age 5, Gareth was introduced to the school computer. In 1983, computers were still rare and mysterious objects, but Gareth became instantly fascinated. He would spend hours exploring what the machine could do, understanding its logic in ways that amazed his teachers. By age 6, Gareth had befriended Sion Lloyd-Jones, 2 years his senior. They would remain close friends through their school years, studying together, cycling together through the Anglesey lanes. Those who knew them remembered Gareth as quiet, modest, brilliant, but never boastful about his abilities. At age 10, Gareth achieved something remarkable. He passed his GCSE in mathematics, an examination typically taken by students aged 16. His mathematical mind was operating at a level years beyond his chronological age. He moved on to Ysgol Uwchradd Bodern Secondary School, where his teachers watched in astonishment as he continued to excel. By age 14, Gareth had completed his A-levels, examinations typically taken at age 18. His mathematics teacher, Geraint Williams, had never seen anything quite like Gareth's ability. The numbers seemed to speak to him in a language only he fully understood. While still attending secondary school, Gareth began part-time studies at Bangor University, just across the Menai Strait from Anglesey. The university had been alerted to this exceptional student, and they made special arrangements to accommodate his studies while he completed his secondary education. In 1995, at just 17 years old, Gareth Williams graduated from Bangor University with a first-class honors degree in mathematics. 17. An age when most young people are still figuring out what they want to study. Gareth had already mastered one of the most challenging academic disciplines. But Gareth wasn't finished. He moved to the University of Manchester to pursue his PhD in computer game technology and advanced computing mathematics. He was mentored by Terry Hewitt, and his research focused on areas applicable to signal processing and intelligence analysis. Though at the time, no one could have predicted exactly where his talents would lead him. Those who knew Gareth during these years remembered him as humble, friendly, but intensely private. He wasn't a great conversationalist, friends said. He preferred his own space, his own thoughts, but he had a memorable smile and laugh when he did open up. He was deeply devoted to cycling, joining the Holyhead Cycling Club and becoming their junior best all-rounder in 1996, then Senior Best All-Rounder from 1997 to 2000. At Cambridge University, where he pursued advanced mathematical courses in 2000, fellow members of the cycling club called him their star rider. His humble manner meant many never guessed they were riding with a mathematical genius. He was simply Gareth. Quiet, kind, exceptionally fit, someone who loved the feeling of wind and rain on his face as he pedaled through the countryside. By his early 20s, Gareth had achieved more academically than most people achieve in a lifetime. He had a PhD from one of Britain's most prestigious universities. He had expertise in mathematics, computing, signal processing, and cryptography. He was exactly the kind of mind that Britain's intelligence services were looking for. In 2001, at age 22, Gareth Williams joined the Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, in Cheltenham. He was about to enter a world of secrets, a world where his brilliant mind would be put to use protecting national security, a world that would ultimately, inexplicably, lead to his death. GCHQ, the Government Communications Headquarters, is Britain's intelligence, security, and cyber agency. Located in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, it's responsible for intercepting and decoding signals intelligence, listening to communications, breaking codes, tracking threats to national security. It's a place where brilliant minds work in complete secrecy, where what you do each day can never be discussed with family or friends, where your entire professional life exists behind classified doors. For Gareth Williams, this environment was in some ways perfect. He was already private by nature, already comfortable with solitude. His introverted personality meant he didn't need office camaraderie or social gatherings to feel fulfilled. He had his work, his mathematics, his cycling. That was enough. Gareth rented a single room in Cheltenham and lived there for nearly a decade. His landlady would later describe him as a quiet, considerate tenant who kept to himself. He made time to visit his family regularly in North Wales, cycling through Snowdonia and Anglesey, reconnecting with his roots, speaking Welsh with his parents. But despite his comfort with the work, despite his exceptional abilities, Gareth found that GCHQ had its limitations. He didn't fit easily into the office culture. While he was deeply respected for his talents, the social dynamics of the workplace weren't natural to him. He preferred the quiet countryside, the rhythm of his cycling, the peaceful solitude of mathematical problems. In early 2009, Gareth was offered something different. The Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence agency, wanted him on secondment for 3 years. He would move to London, work on operational matters, deploy his code-breaking skills in a more active capacity. The work would involve joint operations with American intelligence agencies, including the CIA and NSA. Specifically, Gareth would be working on tracking money laundering networks linked to Russian organized crime. After the fall of the Soviet Union, many former KGB officers had moved into organized crime, and the lines between Russian intelligence services and criminal networks had become blurred. Money was flowing from Russia through European financial systems, and MI6 needed someone with Gareth's mathematical brilliance to follow those complex trails. It was sensitive work, important work, the kind of work that made powerful people nervous when someone got too close to the truth. Gareth moved to London in spring 2009 and took up residence in a top-floor flat at 36 Alderney Street in Pimlico, a quiet area of central London just a short walk from MI6 headquarters on the Thames. The flat was owned by the government, used to house intelligence service staff. It was a modest 2-bedroom apartment, neat and tidy, suitable for Gareth's simple lifestyle. For a time, Gareth threw himself into the work. He attended security conferences, including the 2010 Black Hat briefings and DEF CON, major gatherings for cybersecurity professionals and hackers. His colleagues at MI6 described his intelligence analysis as world-class. He was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, and doing it brilliantly. But Gareth was also quietly beginning to have doubts. The culture at MI6 was different from GCHQ. There was what Gareth called a rat race mentality. Competition over cars, a post-work drinking culture, an emphasis on appearances and status that felt foreign to a Welsh boy who'd grown up cycling country lanes and speaking his first language in chapel. A few months before his death, Gareth requested to return to GCHQ earlier than originally planned. He missed the countryside. He missed the quieter pace. He wanted to go back to Cheltenham. His request was approved. He was scheduled to return in September 2010. But there was another side to Gareth's London life that few knew about. While maintaining his cover as a quiet, private intelligence analyst, Gareth had developed interests that seemed completely at odds with his public persona. He had secretly enrolled in fashion design courses at Central St. Martin's College. He owned approximately £25,000 worth of designer women's clothing, expensive pieces from high-end brands, kept hidden in his wardrobe. Police would later find evidence that he occasionally visited bondage websites, though they stressed he wasn't obsessed and the visits were sporadic. 3 years before his death, Gareth's landlady in Cheltenham and her husband had found him tied to his bedposts, calling for help. They cut him free. He explained he was seeing if he could escape on his own. They believed it was sexual rather than escapology practice. These aspects of Gareth's private life would become central to the investigation into his death. Were they relevant? Were they signs of someone exploring alternative lifestyles privately while maintaining a conservative public image? Or were they something else entirely, evidence, perhaps, that could be used to discredit or blackmail a brilliant intelligence analyst who was getting too close to dangerous truths? In July 2010, Gareth attended a meeting at GCHQ in Cheltenham. He also made trips back to Anglesey visiting family, cycling with his father Ian. On June 2010, just 2 months before his death, he had dinner with his sister Carrie and her husband Chris at the Ritz Hotel in London. Chris would later speak at Gareth's funeral about that evening, remembering Gareth as he'd always been: quiet, kind, brilliant, beloved. By early August 2010, Gareth was in the final weeks before his planned return to GCHQ. His 3-year secondment to MI6 was nearly complete. He was preparing to leave London, to return to the countryside he loved, to resume the quieter life that suited him better. He had no way of knowing he would never make that journey, that within days, his life would end in circumstances so bizarre, so inexplicable, that they would generate theories, investigations, and unanswered questions for more than a decade. The exact date of Gareth Williams's death would later be estimated as around August 16, 2010. But his body wouldn't be discovered until a week later, on August 23rd. Those 7 days of silence would prove crucial to the mystery. 7 days during which forensic evidence degraded, during which anyone who knew what happened had time to disappear, during which the truth became harder and harder to establish. On Monday, August 16th, Gareth was expected at his desk at MI6 headquarters. He didn't show up. This wasn't typical for Gareth. He was reliable, conscientious, not someone who missed work without explanation. But in the world of intelligence work, where officers sometimes have to disappear without notice for operational reasons, his absence didn't immediately trigger alarm. Tuesday came and went. Still no Gareth. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The week progressed, and Gareth Williams remained absent, unresponsive to calls or messages. His colleagues started to feel uneasy. This wasn't right. Even allowing for the unusual demands of intelligence work, a week without contact was excessive. The delay in reporting Gareth missing would later become a source of serious criticism. Why did it take so long? The coroner would later note that MI6's failure to report Williams missing for 7 days caused extra anguish for his family and led to critical loss of forensic evidence. In a normal workplace, if an employee didn't show up for a week without explanation, someone would check on them within a day or two at most. But MI6 isn't a normal workplace. The agency operates under different rules, different assumptions. Perhaps his colleagues thought he'd been called away on classified business. Perhaps the culture of secrecy made people reluctant to ask questions. Perhaps there were other reasons, darker reasons, for the delay. Finally, on Monday afternoon, August 23rd, a full week after Gareth was last seen, the Metropolitan Police were asked to conduct a welfare check at his Pimlico flat. At approximately 4:48 p.m., officers arrived at 36 Alderney Street. They used a spare key to let themselves in. The flat was quiet. The curtains were drawn, creating a dim twilight even though it was mid-afternoon. Everything appeared neat and tidy, orderly, exactly as you'd expect from someone with Gareth's methodical nature. The officers moved through the flat, checking the rooms, the living area, the kitchen, the smaller bedroom. Everything seemed normal, undisturbed. No signs of struggle or violence. Then they opened the door to the main bedroom and stepped into the ensuite bathroom. There, in the bathtub, was a red North Face holdall, a sports bag, the kind used for gym clothes or weekend trips. It was padlocked shut. And inside that locked bag, the officers found the naked, decomposing body of Gareth Williams. The scene was immediately declared a crime scene. Nothing like this was accidental. Nothing like this made sense. A man dead inside a locked bag, in his own bathroom, with no apparent way he could have gotten himself into that position. The investigation was about to begin, but already precious time had been lost. A week of summer heat with the central heating left on full blast despite it being August. A week during which a body decomposed, evidence degraded, and whoever knew what really happened, if it wasn't Gareth acting alone, had time to vanish without a trace. When forensic teams processed the scene at 36 Alderney Street, they found themselves confronted with a puzzle that seemed to defy logical explanation. Every detail they documented, every piece of evidence they collected, seemed to create more questions than answers. The red North Face holdall measured 32 inches by 19 inches, large enough to contain a human body if that body was curled into a fetal position, but small enough that getting into it would require significant contortion. Gareth Williams's body was inside, naked, folded with his knees pulled up to his chest. The bag was closed with a zip that ran around 3 sides. Outside that zip, securing it further, was a padlock threaded through the zipper handles. The bag was completely sealed. And the key to that padlock? It was inside the bag, underneath Gareth's body. Let's pause for a moment to consider the physics of this. To lock yourself inside this bag in this manner, you would need to, first, climb into the bag naked while it lay flat. Second, begin zipping the bag closed around yourself from the inside. Third, get the zip completely around all 3 sides while you were inside. A task that would require reaching outside the bag even as you sealed yourself in. Fourth, thread a padlock through the zipper handles from outside the bag. Fifth, click that padlock shut. And sixth, somehow get the key inside the bag with you under your body after you'd already sealed and locked yourself in. The logical impossibility was immediately apparent. And yet, that's exactly what the scene suggested had happened, if you believed Gareth had been alone. The bathroom itself offered more mysteries. The shower curtain had been drawn across the bathtub, hiding the bag from casual view. The lights were off. A door handle in the flat had been removed, though the reason was never explained. One of Gareth's 4 mobile phones had been reset to factory settings, all data erased. The flat showed no signs of forced entry. It had been locked from the outside. There was no evidence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken objects, nothing that suggested violence or resistance. Apart from slight bruising on Gareth's elbows, consistent with the position he'd been folded into, his body showed no signs of injury or trauma. Toxicology tests came back inconclusive. The body had been decomposing in heat for a week, which degraded many of the compounds that tests look for. No common drugs or alcohol were definitively found in his system, but that didn't mean nothing had been there, only that if there had been, the evidence had deteriorated beyond detection. Most mysterious of all, there were no fingerprints. Not Gareth's fingerprints on the padlock that secured the bag. Not on the zipper handles. Not on the rim of the bathtub where he would have had to grip to position the bag. Not anywhere in the bathroom that would be consistent with someone manipulating these objects. The absence of fingerprints was significant, the coroner would later state. It suggested that either the scene had been wiped clean, or that whoever handled these objects had worn gloves, or that Gareth himself had somehow managed this feat while being extraordinarily careful not to leave prints, a scenario that stretched credibility to its breaking point. Forensic teams did find trace DNA on the bag. Inconclusive fragments from at least 2 unidentified individuals were detected on the zipper and padlock. but the samples were too degraded, too partial, to extract full DNA profiles or identify the contributors. Were these traces left by Gareth's killer? By someone who handled the bag during manufacturing or shipping? By investigators themselves? The DNA raised possibilities but proved nothing. The pathologist, Dr. Richard Shepard, examined Gareth's body carefully. The cause of death could not be definitively determined. The decomposition was too advanced. But Dr. Shepard testified that Gareth likely entered the bag alive. There was no trauma to his head or neck consistent with being forced into the bag while already dead. If someone else had put him in there, Gareth had probably been unconscious, drugged perhaps, or incapacitated in some way that left no trace. If he'd been conscious and unwilling, there would have been signs of struggle. There weren't any. The most probable cause of death, if Gareth had been alive when sealed in the bag, would have been suffocation or carbon dioxide poisoning. Trapped in an airtight space, he would have consumed the available oxygen and succumbed to the buildup of CO2 fairly quickly. Death would have come within minutes, perhaps 15 to 20 minutes at most. But there was another possibility the coroner raised: a short-acting poison, something that would kill quickly and degrade rapidly, leaving no trace after a week of decomposition in heat. Certain substances, particular nerve agents or synthetic compounds, could theoretically do this. The question facing investigators was stark and seemingly simple, yet maddeningly difficult to answer. Had Gareth Williams locked himself in this bag alone, perhaps in some kind of tragic accident or sexual misadventure gone wrong? Or had someone else put him there, staged the scene, and walked away, leaving Gareth to die in the darkness of that red North Face holdall? The evidence pointed in both directions at once, and that would become the central frustration of this case. Every piece of evidence could be interpreted two ways, and neither interpretation was fully satisfying. In the years following Gareth Williams's death, two official investigations reached opposite conclusions. The contradiction between them would fuel speculation, conspiracy theories, and ongoing debate about what really happened in that Pimlico flat. The first investigation culminated in a coroner's inquest in May 2012, nearly 2 years after Gareth's death. Dr. Fiona Wilcox, the Westminster coroner, heard testimony from forensic experts, pathologists, intelligence officers, and Gareth's family. After reviewing all the evidence, she delivered a narrative verdict. Gareth Williams's death was unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated. Dr. Wilcox stated she was satisfied on the balance of probabilities that Gareth was killed unlawfully. She concluded that another party had placed Gareth in the bag and, on the balance of probabilities, locked it. She rejected suicide as a possibility. She also rejected the theory that this was some kind of sexual accident, autoerotic asphyxiation, or bondage practice gone wrong. The coroner noted the absence of hand and footprints in the bathroom as significant. She criticized MI6 heavily for taking 7 days to report Gareth missing, noting this delay caused both suffering for his family and critical loss of forensic evidence. She suggested that Gareth was probably alive when put in the bag and likely died from CO2 poisoning or from a short-acting poison that left no trace. Gareth's family agreed with this verdict. Their lawyer stated they believed foul play was involved and stood by the coroner's conclusions. They alleged that crucial DNA evidence had been interfered with and that fingerprints had been removed as part of a cover-up. But the Metropolitan Police weren't satisfied with the coroner's verdict. They launched a second investigation, a 12-month review that included unprecedented access to serving MI6 staff. In November 2013, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Martin Hewitt announced their conclusions. Despite re-examining all evidence and investigating new leads, police said the most probable scenario was that Gareth had died alone in his flat as the result of accidentally locking himself inside the bag. They acknowledged that many questions remained unanswered. They acknowledged it was a highly unusual death, but they found no definitive evidence of third-party involvement. To support their conclusion, police commissioned experiments. Could a person lock themselves in such a bag? Expert forensic investigator Peter Falding tried more than 300 times to replicate the feat using an identical North Face holdall. He failed every single time. In his 2025 memoir, Faulding stated bluntly, "In my opinion, Gareth was already dead when he was put in the bag. It looked to me like someone was trying to smear him, but other experts thought it was theoretically possible, however difficult, however improbable. And police clung to this possible, therefore probable, therefore the most likely explanation. The contradiction was stark. The coroner said unlawful killing. The police said probable accident. Both looked at the same evidence. Both reached opposite conclusions. And the public was left to wonder which version was true. Then came the theories about why someone might have killed Gareth Williams, if indeed he was killed. The Russian theory. Multiple sources, including former KGB officer Boris Karpachkov, who defected to Britain, claimed that Russian intelligence services killed Gareth. The theory held that Russian agents attempted to recruit Gareth as a double agent, possibly using compromising photographs to blackmail him. When he refused, they killed him with a lethal injection, possibly into his ear, leaving minimal trace, and staged the scene to look like a sexual accident. Norman Baker, who served as a Liberal Democrat Home Office minister in David Cameron's government, supported this theory in a 2022 podcast. He pointed to Gareth's work tracking Russian money laundering through London's financial district. Baker theorized that Gareth had discovered the identity of a Russian mole within British intelligence services and was killed to protect that mole. The theory had compelling elements. Gareth was working on sensitive Russian-related intelligence. Money laundering networks linked to Moscow-based organized crime were exactly the kind of thing that would make powerful people nervous. Russia has a documented history of assassinating defectors and troublesome foreign agents on British soil. But there was no hard evidence. No witnesses who saw Russian agents near Gareth's flat. No definitive proof that Gareth had discovered a mole or had been approached by recruitment. Just possibilities and allegations. The intelligence cover-up theory. Some believed that British intelligence agencies themselves were involved, either in Gareth's death or in covering up what really happened. Proponents pointed to the 7-day delay in reporting him missing. The fact that the head of MI6 and Britain's most senior police officer left shortly after the body was discovered to discuss keeping the investigation within its remit. The rapid conclusion by police that it was an accident, contradicting the coroner. According to this theory, perhaps Gareth had discovered something compromising about British intelligence operations. Perhaps he was considered a security risk for some reason. Perhaps his death was arranged, or perhaps it was accidental but covered up to avoid embarrassment or exposure of classified operations. But again, hard evidence was lacking. While there were certainly irregularities in how the case was handled, irregularity isn't proof of murder or cover-up. Police initially suggested, and some continue to believe, that Gareth's death was the result of a sexual practice gone wrong. He'd been found tied up once before. He occasionally visited bondage websites. He had an interest in fashion and cross-dressing that he kept hidden. Perhaps this theory went, Gareth was experimenting with extreme bondage, the challenge of escaping from impossible situations as a form of thrill-seeking. Perhaps he misjudged, got stuck, panicked, and suffocated before he could escape. But the coroner explicitly rejected this theory. There was no evidence of autoerotic asphyxiation. The scene didn't match typical patterns of sexual accidents. And critically, the absence of Gareth's fingerprints on the padlock and bag suggested he hadn't been the one manipulating those objects. In January 2021, the Metropolitan Police launched yet another review. A forensic re-examination using modern techniques that weren't available in 2010. The results came back in November 2023. No new DNA evidence was found. No further lines of inquiry were identified. The case remained exactly where it had been. Full of questions, short on answers. A 2024 update confirmed that based on all available evidence, police still believed Gareth had likely been alone when he died. They acknowledged his family disagreed and maintained their belief in foul play. They promised any new evidence would be reviewed. But after 14 years, new evidence seems unlikely to emerge. On September 26, 2010, what would have been Gareth Williams' 32nd birthday, he was buried at YNYS Cemetery in Valley, Anglesey. The funeral service was held at Bethel Chapel in Holyhead, the chapel where his family had worshipped throughout his childhood. His family attended. His friends from Anglesey, from his cycling clubs, from his school days. Former colleagues from GCHQ and MI6, many of whom could never discuss the classified work they'd done alongside him. And Sir John Sawers, the head of MI6 itself, paying respects to an analyst whose death had brought unwanted attention to the agency's operations. Gareth was laid to rest in the Welsh soil he'd loved, far from the London flat where he'd died. His gravestone at Ynys Cemetery stands quietly, visited occasionally by those who remember him, not as the spy in the bag, for the sensational headline, but as Gareth, the quiet boy from Valley who loved mathematics and cycling and spoke Welsh with his parents. His family has lived with this mystery for more than 14 years now. His parents, Ian and Ellen, had watched their son's extraordinary trajectory from brilliant child to university prodigy to government intelligence analyst. They'd been proud of his achievements even when they couldn't fully know what he was doing in London. And then, suddenly, inexplicably, he was gone, and no one could tell them why. His sister Carrie lost a brother she'd grown up with, who'd cycled with her through Anglesey lanes, who'd attended family dinners at the Ritz just weeks before his death. The not knowing is perhaps the cruelest part, the endless questions with no satisfying answers. The people of Anglesey, where Gareth grew up, have never forgotten him. Local councillor John Chorlton spoke about how the community wanted answers, wanted peace for the Williams family, wanted justice if justice was due. But the years have passed, and those answers haven't come.